Yes, we can hear you,
but we can't
Matthias.
see you.
You can't see me. I don't know what's wrong with my camera. But I'll be trying to connect. If I fail, then I'll be using the audio platform. Well, let me start by introducing myself. My name is Karangwa Matthias. I work at the National Bank of Rwanda, and I've been working there from 2011 up to present. And I work in the research department. In addition to that, I'm a PhD student in Europe at the University of Minho, doing economics. And at the moment, I'm in the final stages of completing my PhD thesis. Today, I'll be your moderator. As you are aware, we have a conference today, a live conference organized by the Center for Development Policy. It's a live conference with the theme Cash Transfers and Poverty Reduction in Rwanda. And the theme is motivated by the two papers that we have today, to be presented by Dr. Kadoz Edward, and the other one to be presented by Mr. Havinan Dominique. The first paper is on measuring the impact of unconditional cash transfers on consumption and poverty in Rwanda. And the second presentation will be on the effect of international remittances on poverty in Rwanda. As you can see, all of them are focused on cash transfers and poverty reduction in Rwanda. So without taking much of your time, I think the agenda was shared with you. Let me take this time to welcome you, everybody. And let me take this opportunity to invite the Executive Director of CDP, Dr. Kassim Munyegera, to give his welcoming remarks and to introduce the presenters today. Dr. Kassim Munyegera, the floor is yours. Thank you.
We can't hear you, Kassim.
A moment, yes. Thank you very much, Matthias, for the introduction. Before I introduce myself, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome all the participants in this virtual conference. So the most important thing in my speech would be to appreciate your time, to appreciate the fact that you honored our invitation to be part of this evidence building process of CDP. So my name is Kassim Munyegera, and I'm a development economist. Unlike others who it seems in this platform, people from Europe. For me, my studies were in Asia, so in Tokyo. So that was in development economics. And I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Development Policy. And I've been working here in Rwanda for the past almost 6 years. So once again, I thank you very much for honoring our invitation to be part of this virtual workshop, which is trying to explore the impact of two types of transfers. One is remittances, and another one is on social transfers, like in terms of cash transfers, unconditional cash transfers. To be specific, the Vision Umrenje program, direct support. So at CDP, just to give you a brief overview of what CDP is, for those who may not know it in detail. So the Center for Development Policy is a think tank based here in Kigali, Rwanda. It is non-partisan and is Pan-African. So I think those are the key main factors that identify CDP, non-partisan and Pan-African. So Pan-African in such a way that we are so much motivated by the desire to build and use evidence in the development processes, whether at the formulation of policies or at their implementation. What we always want to have, or what we really stand for, is the fact that evidence can be used at all the levels of the development process. So that's actually one of the main reasons why we are here, because we are trying to distill the evidence that is out there in terms of what works and what doesn't work, in terms of poverty alleviation in this specific case. So there are many approaches to poverty alleviation, and so many factors that drive poverty alleviation. So in this case, we are trying to see how do remittances and how do unconditional cash transfers contribute towards poverty alleviation. That's the main reason we are here. So the use of evidence is very important here at CDP. We have three main aspects of our work. One is policy analysis and the use of evidence. So we facilitate the generation and also the utilization of evidence in development policy. And the second aspect of our work is capacity building or capacity enhancing, whereby we endeavor to build or even increase capacity of individuals, in organizations and institutions within Africa to be able to generate evidence and also utilize it in making evidence-based interventions, whether within government or within the non-government sector. So the third aspect of our work is cross-country learning. So we facilitate cross-country learning within Africa. We generate evidence that works on things that work in one country, and think of how it can be, like the evidence can be used to make sure that some aspects, some solutions, development solutions which are tested in some countries can also be tried out with the modifications in other countries. So cross-country learning is one of the main aspects of our work. And in that matter, we engage policymakers, we engage the development community, we engage think tanks, academic institutions in the process of generating and also utilizing evidence. So what we can say is that we know for this particular topic, we know that Rwanda is very well known for having homegrown solutions like the Girinka program, the Vision Umurenje program, VUP. So for this particular program, VUP, we know that about $50 million has been invested in the program in an attempt to alleviate poverty from, starting from 2008 up to now. The program still runs. So the question is, with so much funds invested by the government and the development community, what is the impact in terms of the ultimate goal of alleviating poverty? So that is a very important policy question for us to answer based on the evidence. What does the evidence say? What are the pathways through which such programs, such homegrown solutions influence the level of poverty in the country? And in terms of remittances, Rwanda is one of the countries where the flow of remittances has been increasing for the past decade. And recent statistics from the World Bank indicate that the country received about $270 million worth of remittances, international remittances for that matter, which account for about 2.5% of the country's GDP. So the choice of remittances and social protection policies to guide our discussion and their important link to poverty is definitely clear to everyone that these are very important aspects of the poverty alleviation agenda, which Rwanda has been pursuing for a number of years, especially starting from the year 2000, but of course also going way back before 2000. So the question is, what do we know so far about the evidence that links those two types of transfers, remittances, and social unconditional cash transfers, in other words, the VUP-Direct Support that is given to poor families. So how do they link to poverty alleviation? Is there any positive impact on poverty alleviation? And what are the pathways through which that happens, if at all it is really happening? So this is the main reason that gathers all of us here to be able to generate evidence, to be able to inform policies through the available evidence. And I hope that we can have a fruitful discussion on this important topic as one of the starting series of discussions on the different topics that we at CDP always work on. So I once again thank you very much and welcome you to this virtual workshop. Thank you for creating the time, and please enjoy the discussion, and I hope that we can have some messages going out to the intended users, the policymakers, but also the non-policy actors. Thank you very much. I now hand over to the moderator, just to take you through the entire session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kasim. Thank you, participants. Before giving you some of the ground rules, let me first of all apologize to you for the slight delay we had, and we hope to correct that going forward in future. And some of the housekeeping rules: you are requested to unmute while not to mute when you are not speaking, and to unmute when you are speaking, because as you have all witnessed a while ago, we had some echoes. And if you're not speaking, you are kindly requested to also remove your video. If you want to have a say, if you want to comment, ask a question, you are requested to raise your hand and make the intervention you want to make. But you can also use the chat box to write your question. The question will be picked up and answered by the presenters. When you're asking a question, or if you're making an intervention, you are kindly requested to be very brief in the interest of time, so that we can try not to exceed the planned time. As you can see, we started quite late. We had a loss of about 10 minutes. Without further ado, let me take this opportunity to introduce the first presenter. Mr. Habimana is a highly analytical statistician with 10 years progressive experience in modernization of statistical systems, complex household and business survey design and implementation, including poverty analysis and microeconomic modeling. Habimana is a strategic thinker with a proven track record of capacity building that responds to national data requirements for tracking progress of national, regional, and global economic development programs, including the SDGs. Mr. Habimana has worked in developing countries and with international organizations such as Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, UNICEF, the World Bank, DFID, and Paris 21. He is currently finalizing his PhD in data science with specialization in econometrics at the African Center of Excellence in Data Science, University of Rwanda. So Mr. Habimana will be making the first presentation. Thank you, Mr. Habimana, for preparing for this presentation, and we hope to learn from you. And we hope also to take up your findings as the Executive Director already mentioned, to take up the findings to inform policy, and to enhance evidence policy making. The next presenter is Dr. Edward Kadozi. Edward Kadozi is a development policy analyst at Rwanda Development Board. He's also a visiting lecturer at the University of Rwanda, Kigali Independent University, and an adjunct lecturer at the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. He has over 12 years of progressive professional and research experience in the areas of migration and development. He obtained his PhD from the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands in the political economy of development, focusing on the economics of remittances. So you can see that we are going to learn from the guru, because the man has worked on remittances for quite some years. Let me not consume a lot of time and invite the first presenter to make his presentation. Mr. Habimana, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matthias, for the floor. Let me now share my screen. Okay. So did you see my screen already there?
Yes, yes, you can see it.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the good introductions indeed. My name is Dominique Harimana, and I'm going to give a presentation about our paper, which is an effort of 4 co-authors that you can see here in this cover page. And this paper is basically published in the World Development Perspective Journal. And it's all about measuring the impact of unconditional cash transfers on consumption and poverty in Rwanda. I'll be trying to be brief, basically, so that I can have much more time for the discussions. So the outline of the presentation is about giving you, let's say, the main purpose of the paper. Why did we, let's say, undertake it, and give you a bit of background. Then move on unconditional cash transfer programs, let's say, at the global level, but also specifically for the case of Rwanda. And then we talk about briefly about the data we have used and methods that have been applied in this paper, and go to the results and conclusions at the end. The goal of undertaking this kind of study was that we wanted to measure the effect of Rwanda's unconditional cash transfer program on a number of different outcomes of interest. The first one was the incidence of poverty, which is measured as basically the proportion of population that are not able to meet, to have a consumption per capita equivalent equals to, let's say, $253 in January 2014 prices, but also trying to see the impact of the program on consumption per capita equivalent as well, but also on household food expenditure, which includes also the food from home production, which we call basically auto consumption. And this kind of interest was important because we wanted to see if an unconditional cash transfer program is useful and can be expanded, not only for Rwanda, but also elsewhere in other countries as well. Now, if you look at some of the justifications of the study, is that Rwanda is a country of about 12.4 million population as of 2019. And we know that there are about 420 million people who are living in African countries whose GDP per capita is between $746, which is the situation of 1995, and $2,226, the situation of Rwanda again in 2019. And you know where Rwanda is located because we are speaking basically mostly to the Rwandan colleagues and those who most wondered. Now, regarding the background, where Rwanda was, let's say, almost two decades ago and where it is now. Now, as we know, Rwanda has gone through different situations which were really difficult. The 1994 genocide against the Tutsi left the country being in extremely poor conditions. The country was almost devastated. But the good news is that there have been some rebounds afterwards, thanks to various programs that the government of Rwanda have implemented so far. And as a result of the rebound, what we see is that poverty reduced by 20% in nearly 15 years, as you could see here. The same also applies for the extreme poverty. And the real GDP also have been growing up by 6.2% per annum. And whereby the service and agricultural sector was the main drivers of that development, but also the industry sector, even though it's small, but has contributed to some extent. And these are remarkable, really, let's say, achievement that the government of Rwanda have been able to achieve within nearly 15 years. That has happened because there were a number of different programs in place that were just implemented over time. In 2008, the government of Rwanda decided to basically introduce what we call the flagship anti-poverty program, which is basically the Vision 2020 Umurenge program, which has three main components. The first one is the direct cash support for those unable to fend themselves, which were basically rolled out gradually since 2009 until 2016 when the coverage was free. And this is the main focus of our study today. But it has a second component, which is the public works program that also started in 2008. And also what we call the microcredit schemes for loans that focus on loans for household and small and medium businesses, which again started almost the same period. This anti-poverty package, the VUP, is considered as a tool or one of the tools to alleviate poverty, but at the same time to also help having the pathways to sustainable livelihood of Rwandan citizens or the beneficiaries, in other words. If you look at the unconditional cash transfer programs, let's say at a global level, they are quite different compared to what we call the conditional cash transfers. And we have examples of, let's say, similar programs in Latin America, such as the Progreso and Oportunidad in Mexico. We know about the Bolsa Familia in Brazil. Bangladesh has similar examples. And all these kind of programs are quite different from what we call the conditional cash transfer programs. We also know that at least 800 million population or recipients from 150 countries have been benefiting from unconditional cash transfer program worldwide. And what is more important is that the governments have been really investing in this program because of let's say, the expectation of helping to reduce poverty, whereby 1.5% of GDP have been invested in this program at a global level in Sub-Saharan Africa. And in Rwanda, particularly also, we have the same rate of investment for the cash and in-kind transfers. When it comes to the unconditional cash transfer program, only Rwanda has basically invested almost 10 times its investment on unconditional cash transfer program over that period of about 15 years, basically. And we also see an increasing interest in the same program, whereby, for example, you see Latin America almost tripling their investment in 1 decade, as you can see here. Sub-Saharan Africa is also showing interest in this program, whereby countries that are really implementing or designing and implementing any conditional cash transfer program have been doubled within 5 years. And this is always showing that really this program are becoming very, very important when it comes to poverty alleviation. Now, why unconditional cash transfer program looks to be more important compared to, for example, conditional cash transfer program? First of all, the main reason is that these programs are straightforward in terms of, let's say, reducing poverty, and they're inexpensive to administer and monitor, simply because they do allow households to choose how to use or how to spend their received transfers. That's one benefit. At the second time, they have been found to be more effective. For example, the World Bank study in 79 countries, of course, using what we call the accounting approach. That the study of World Bank found that the participating in this program have managed to reduce poverty by around 8 percentage points for the lowest quintile. Those are the bottom 20% of the population. Even though the study found less poverty reduction in Rwanda, which is about 4 percentage points for the case of Rwanda, but it seems to be quite effective. So, but on the other hand, the DAC studies that have measured really the impact of unconditional cash transfer program on poverty reduction, the example of Vietnam, it found that there have been 3 percentage point reduction in poverty rate as a result of participating in the same program. We have also seen that at least at the global level, 23% of the poorest quintile have benefited from the same program you're talking about here. And we also have an example of a case of Rwanda whereby some of the researchers have found about 10 percentage point reduction in poverty as again results of the same program. Now, if we narrow down to the context of Rwanda, what are the criteria of really benefiting from this unconditional cash transfer program? So the first eligibility criteria is that the household has to be classified in the category 1 and 2. As you know, all the households in the country are classified from the category 1, which is the poorest category, to the 4th category, which is basically for the rich people. So therefore, these beneficiaries has to come from the first category, which is basically the very poor and unable to fend themselves, or coming from the second category, which composed by households that have some land, housing, but sometimes no savings, and children sometimes don't go to school, and so on and so forth. Then the second important category or criteria that is followed here is basically the household should have any member who is able to work. So those are the 2 important criteria or eligibility criteria for benefiting from the program here. And when it comes to benefits that they're receiving or the transfer they're receiving, a household composed of only 1 member is receiving about $10 per month, whereas a household composed of, let's say, 5 or more people is getting it's almost about $30 per month. And those transfers has to be deposited in one of the micro financial institutions called Umurenge Sacco, in terms of also encouraging the participants to also use the financial services in that way. But if you compare the received transfers vis-a-vis the poverty line per month, the benefit seems to be quite almost half of that. And if you consider someone who is only household with a single household member. Now, in terms of rollout of the program first of all started in the first poorest sectors, which are basically the sub-district demarcations in a way, out of 416 sectors for the first year. And the rollout have been done progressively. And by 2013-14, the reference year of our data sets here, 44% of sectors have been covered by the program. But the fact that the program targeted, first of all, the poorest sectors, it makes the program to be non-random. So which, of course, influence also the approach or the methods we have to use in this context here that I will talk about in the next slides. However, the program have only managed to cover 1.8% of the entire population, meaning that the coverage is quite small. But in terms of targeting, as you could see in these two maps here, the maps on left-hand side is about the distribution of participation rate of unconditional cash transfer program by household by districts, whereas the map on the right-hand side is about the poverty rate by districts. So what you could see that the districts that are classified that have more percentage population being poor are the ones that have the higher rate of participation in terms of unconditional cash transfer program, which gives us a message that at least in terms of targeting geographically, so the program have done quite well in that context. Now, coming to the data that we have used in our analysis here, we used the house survey data conducted by the National Institute of Statistics of Rwanda in 2013-14. And this survey, EICV4, it has two main samples. There is a national sample of about 14,000 households, which covers anybody. But we also have an additional subsample of VUP beneficiaries alone, which is about 2,460 households, which basically was good and allows us to be able to carry out this study, because with this subsample included in the national sample and using the sample questionnaire to collect information, it allows us really to be able to carry out this kind of impact assessment. Now, what the data tells us here. So as you could see in the first table here, in the second column, we have the discrete statistics on different, let's say, measures of outcome of interest. And whereas the third column is about now the non-beneficiaries people. So what we see is that poverty is as expected, is higher among the beneficiaries compared to non-beneficiaries, and statistically significant. And if you look at also the consumption, different types of consumption, is the same thing. We see a completely different picture when you compare beneficiaries and non-beneficiaries, except the consumption from own food production. This is because if as you know, more than 50% of the population in the country are basically subsistence farmers. So which means that they rely more on agricultural activities to be able to survive. And therefore, it doesn't matter whether these are the beneficiaries or non-beneficiaries, because that's the underlying source of own food consumptions in a way. So, but as you can see towards the bottom of the table, the annual direct support transfers received is about 62,000 per household, which is almost about maybe 30% of the total consumption, and it's not quite small. It's quite a reasonable amount of money that they are receiving on annual basis. So, but the message here is that from the monetary point of view, the beneficiaries are different from the non-beneficiaries in this context. Now, if you look at these graphs here, especially from the non-monetary point of view, what you see in the top left box, you can see that the beneficiaries of the program are coming mainly from the category 1 and 2, as one would expect. But we still have about 15% of the household that are benefiting from the program, yet they're coming from the category 3 and 4, which basically gives us a sense of the level of the mistargeting from the program itself. But at least a big proportion is coming from the expected, let's say, to the first two categories. Now, if you look at on the right-hand side, on the right-hand side top box here, what you see that you realize that basically the beneficiaries of the program are mainly female-headed household, and they have, let's say, they have many members who are disabled in a way, and they tend to be older compared to non-beneficiaries. And also, they have quite a high proportion of elderly members, those who are aged 65 and above. If you go at the bottom of the boxes here, on the left-hand side, you can see that the beneficiaries of the program are less educated, as would imagine. And they are also basically mainly independent farmers, so which means that they are subsistence farmers basically, and the proportion is quite high, 75% compared to almost 50 from non-beneficiaries. All these differences are significant basically, so which means that again, this confirms that beneficiaries and non-beneficiaries are completely different people. And if someone tried to measure the impact by simply taking a difference between the beneficiaries and non-beneficiaries, that will not be basically work. It will be not be correct. So now, how then did we go about measuring the impact properly? After knowing that this is a non-random program, and also that these people are completely different. So we had to rely on the matching methods. And the first one we basically relied on, or we used, is what we call the propensity score matching. And now, without going into the mathematical formulas, the main idea is that we know the treatment group, which are basically the beneficiaries of the household. So what we have to do was to find a set of variables, what we call the covariate, that we basically can use to identify the control group. So what you need to do was that using a set of identified covariate variables, we have to match the treated group to non-treated, let's say, households. And then once we find a control group which is very close or very similar to the treatment group, then we measure, let's say, the outcome of the program, the impact of the program on different outcomes we have, and then compare. So that's the main story that you're talking about here under the propensity score matching. However, we have to make sure that our matching methods is satisfying the conditional independence, meaning that we have to ensure that the observed variables or the covariate variables that are observed to us, once we control for them, then the potential outcome is independent from the treatment status. That's very, very important condition to be satisfied. And mathematically, that's how it is expressed. The second condition is what we call the common support, let's say, assumption. So which means that we have to make sure that there is enough overlap, let's say, of course, using the set of covariate variables we have identified for the treatment group and the control group, so that we have adequate matches. So it means what? It means that if you look at this graph on the top right side, so we have to restrict our measurement on what we call the region of common support here. So that's what the second condition means here. And the probability of being treated and untreated has to be always between 0 and 1. So that was one of the methods we used, and it allows us now to basically compare the outcomes as if we have a random design program. But that's the whole idea. However, we know that the propensity score matching relies on observed covariates, basically, so which may have an effect on inference. So that's why we have to go to use other methods, matching methods. The second one was basically the covariate matching, which is the nearest neighbor matching, which we've idea that we normalize our set of covariate and then construct a certain Mahalanobis distance between the pairs of each observation, one from the treated, not treated, and then match. And then once we identify the control group, and then we go and measure the outcome, the impact, and then simply compare. So furthermore, we also tried other methods that have been found to be quite effective in this matching exercise. And the third one was what we call the inverse probability weighting, whereby it simply relies on regression that we use the variable T, meaning the treated or untreated, and then we have to ensure that we use the weights that are coming from the propensity score matching of the previous methods, and whereby the weight is 1 for the treated cases, whereas the probability of the weight for non-treated cases is simply the inverse of the propensity score matching, the propensity scores that we get from the propensity score matching exercise. And finally, the fourth one was more of using what we call the doubly robust methods, IPWRA, with the idea that we basically use a kind of two equation, one equation predicting for treated, another one predicting for non-treated, and then compute the differences as the impact of our program. So we have used these four methods in our measures to be able to identify the impact. Now, for robustness check, what we did, we basically used two sets of different approaches. We followed the idea of Ichino and his colleagues, which is basically to say that let's allow some of the covariates to have a certain level of confounding effects on the results, and then examine how robust the results will be once we violated this let's say conditions of independence assumption. So this was done through a kind of simulation to be able to see if we basically violate this kind of condition for this particular variable, how does the results react vis-a-vis that kind of variation. Then the second approach of sensitivity analysis was more of using different samples. Let's say, how about if we compute our results only focusing on those in the category 1 and 2? Does it differ from when you have the full sample? How about considering household lacking able-bodied adult population who are in the working age group, and vis-a-vis those who don't have anyone able to work but also outside the working age? So again, for the context of trying to see if our results are robust enough to be trusted. Now, going to the results themselves, as I was explaining in the methodological side, the first one was to basically run a logistic regression to be able to identify the determinant of participating in a direct support program. And by basically running the logistic regression, but also the linear probability models, what we found that indeed, the households who are most likely to participate in the program are coming from the category 1 and 2. They are mainly female-headed, and they tend to be more disabled compared to others, and they are also elderly. They have elderly household members compared to non-beneficiaries, as you could see here. And the marginal effects, together with the coefficients of the ordinary stress methods, confirms basically the same results. Now, after that, we have to make sure that is our matching really working properly. And we have to also ensure that that is the case before we move on to the estimation of the impact. Now, this is basically table 3 here, whereby you see the first column, it's simply the differences in this number of covariates that have used in our model. And these are the raw differences before we do any matching exercise. So you are comparing those in the category 1 for beneficiaries and non-beneficiaries before you do the matching. And then in the subsequent columns, we are presenting now how the difference have reduced by each of the models we have used in terms of narrowing down the difference between treated and the control group before we can go ahead and measure the impact. So you could see the 3 methods we have used here, the propensity score matching, nearest neighbor matching, and inverse probability weights. They have reduced the difference between the control and treatment group substantially, which means that the control group we have now at the end is much more similar to the treatment group we have. And then we have assurance that we could go on and then measure the effect. Now, in terms of results after doing all those kind of exercises, that this table here summarizes all the results we have in the paper. So what you see in the first columns, in the second column, sorry, under the observed column, these are the, let's say, the measures we have measured without basically applying the matching methods. So the accounting column, it shows basically the findings of the World Bank study that have been basically applied, that we have applied if we have to measure, we have to use this accounting approach. These are the results we get in terms of poverty reduction. And then the third column is about the treatment effects we measured in our approach, and we also included the impacts of remittances on the same households if we have to compare that, which I will come back to it later on. Now, what you could see, you see that the accounting approach, what we call naive approach, it was showing that the participating program have resulted in a poverty reduction of about 24%. Whereas when we use the matching methods, as I explained, we see that the participating in the program has reduced poverty of between 5 and 7 percentage points, which is quite smaller compared to when you use the accounting approach. If you also look at the results on consumption, here I have to say that the figures in bold means they're significant, and those that are not in bold, they are not significant. So you could see the effect on consumption, different types of consumption, is kind of mixed results. So some of them shows that, consumption have increased, yes, but not all the models have confirmed the level of significance. And what is more interesting is that you could see that participating in the program have reduced own food consumption. And I will come back to the explanations here, is that this was an indication that we found that basically the household, instead of taking the received transfers and use them for food consumption and others, they choose basically to use them for investment. And therefore, sorry?
Can you try to be quick, because we have gone beyond the 20 minutes allocated?
Sorry. Yeah, I'm finalizing this.
Let me try to be lenient and give you like how much time? 6 minutes? Yeah,
that'd be fine. That'll be done.
All right.
Okay, so you could see that yes, these have reduced own food consumption, and because we found that basically the beneficiaries choose not to spend on that, but rather than just investing, let's say, in farming and the other activities, and including livestock. So when we try to measure the impact of remittances on the households here, what we found much more higher poverty reduction and even much more increase in terms of consumption. So we wanted to see how this household reacted to the transfers and conditional currency transfers vis-a-vis remittances. And you could see here that they have reacted differently to the remittances, as you could see, which was one of the main insights we get from the analysis. Now, in terms of robustness, if I present it very quickly, so after, let's say, checking or measuring the same outcomes on different samples, so we could see that when we narrow our sample with the category 1 and 2, we get more similar results compared to what we have when we use the full sample. But when we basically we consider household in the working age, but not having any member able to work, so we found a little bit much higher poverty reduction, but in terms of consumption, they were not significant. And then when it comes to those outside the working age, but having able to work, we didn't find any significance of the results at all, which gives us an idea that probably house beneficiaries who are in this category, they are just there because as a result of erroneous in a way, or mistargeting in a way, and that's why we are losing the significance of the results. So now to conclude, we find a modest positive effect on measured poverty rates. So we also see a modest post-food consumption, but no change in non-food consumption. We've seen that the program leads to reduction in non-food consumption for the reason I was explaining. And also the household behavior responses, we found it to be matters when someone is measuring the impact of an unconditional cancer program poverty. Why? Because this household responded differently remittances, as we've seen, but also they have responded to VUP cash transfers by working less in their own farms. Instead, they choose to invest. And this is very, very important. So in terms of policy implications, the program is very useful, of course, but it doesn't oversell, as we've seen. So we've seen that the coverage is still low, so therefore there is more work to do in terms of covering more eligible households. And more importantly, the program should not only be judged on outcome poverty reduction, but also it should be judged on how it leaves, let's say, the old and thin people of the need to work less in their fields. And also, we had a limitation on data in terms of trying to investigate the long-term effect of the program when it comes to spending on investments and income-generating activities. So we recommend that probably if future data collection activities might collect more information, then can allow researchers to to measure more long-term effects of the program. Thank you very much. For more detailed information, so the paper is available on its site, and anyone is free to access it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dominic, for the good presentation. Even though you exceeded your time, I think it was worth adding you more time because obviously the paper is very interesting, and I think people have recorded their questions, comments. After having the second presentation by Edward, we will open up the floor for discussions and questions. For the moment, let's hold them and follow the second presentation. Then we'll come back and make comments or ask questions. Edward, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Marcia. Thank you, Dominic. Are you able to see my slide? I'm trying to share the slide.
Yes, but you have to put it.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you. Let me expand it. Yes. Is it okay now?
Yeah, fine.
Okay. Thank you. I'll be quick because one, Dominic has taken time, and another thing is that he has helped me to cover some of the things I wanted to say. So regarding the data and the methodology, thank you very much, and thank you, Dominic, for the nice presentation and our participants. I think to me this is a very interesting discussion because one thing is that we are responding to the cause of our mission as a CDP, but also the two papers attaching to my professional work as my academic work. So it's a very interesting one. So I'll be quick. One, as I set up the stage, is that this discussion about the debates about the effect of cash transfers on the development outcomes, it has been there and it is still going on. And thanks to Dominic talked about these regions of the world, how the cash transfers has evolved. However, the question remains, and this maybe I will come back to this, what might be causing all these continuous discussions. One, this paper I'm presenting try to address the issue of how remittances as part of cash transfers are affecting development outcomes. So maybe for the participants who don't know about remittances, these are transfers, both in cash and in kind, that are set either formally or informally by migrants living outside of the country of origin. So their effects are in this range I have indicated here below. One in human capital development, that's health, education, and others. Another one is in the poverty alleviation and welfare improvement, which is the most important area that we are discussing here. But of recently, these other four areas are coming up as well. That's remittances affecting this area, business and savings. In previous studies, didn't touch about these elements of savings and business. So we have also the property investments. I think for those who are in the diaspora, if you could sample those who are on this platform, you will find that probably 80% of them have a property asset back home. Another area is financial development, and I think a lot of work has been done on financial development and remittances. In areas like these developing countries, remittances substitute the failures of financial services or financial institutions by providing complementary financial assets or finance to meet the different needs of the recipients. Another area is the economic growth. I think much has been worked on this. However, economic growth in terms of macroeconomic effects of remittances, looking at how they affect the economic growth, how they affect macroeconomic variables like the content or the substance of balance of payments, stabilizing the macroeconomic variables like the currencies and everything. So remittances touch across all these areas, and the effect keeps on growing. So as Matthias said, have been in this area for quite a number of years, and these are one of the 4 areas I have learned as I work on this area of remittances or migration and development. One lesson you learn is that the impact of remittances on development requires broader framework of analysis. You not only touch on macro or micro, but also you have to integrate other aspects that really to be able to understand different mechanisms through which remittances affect development. The second part is that the impact of remittances depends on who, mostly the social category, who receives these transfers, because a lot and more empirical studies suggest that because of they contradict the effect of remittances, because they tend to say that remittances are received by rich or non-poor recipients, therefore they don't have an effect because the non-poor recipients are able to finance migration of the migrants. So there is no effect on that. However, as I will indicate in the next slide, there is increasing evidence that now my remittances are also affecting those who are in the lower quantiles or lower socioeconomic categories. We shall see in the case of Rwanda. The third is that the development effect of remittance is conditioned by the good and policy environment or institutional and policy environment. This is very critical, as I will touch maybe part of a sub-Saharan African country, because institutions, as Rodrigue says, matters in making these transfers, not only remittances, but also other capital inflows in a way that they affect development, because they affect the way how the channels through which these inflows are transferred, but also how they are deployed in the local economy to affect development. The last is that the impact of remittance varies across and within sub-Saharan African countries. This is because countries differ and institutional framework and through which remittances are channeled also differ. But also another element is that the policies in place or the interventions in place within the countries through which governments are able to engage and create opportunities for diaspora to invest back also differ. Then this comes back to this aspect of heterogeneity across countries. And that's why I say here that these factors are country specific. Countries differ, and in looking into that, they are different. Looking at the trends is that sub-Saharan African countries have been receiving remittances exponentially. Remittances inflows have been increasing exponentially like other sources of capital inflows over the last 40 years. The same is if you subject these inflows to GDP, you find that the percentage is increasing in terms of sub-Saharan African countries up to around 4.4%. So you can see that the increase have increased over the last 10 years. So I'll be trying to be quick. Look, then if you customize it to Rwanda, you find the same trend, is that you can see that remittance is following the same trend as FDI, as ODA, net ODAs. And this is the effect also when it comes to the contribution to GDP, almost goes the same way. though we are seeing ODA reducing over time. So we can see, looking at the last year's data from the World Bank, is that remittances is now about to 2.4% of our GDP. So if I look at the other data from other sources like International Organization for Migration, so we have about 513,907 Rwandan migrants abroad, according to IOM data. But these migrants, some say this 241 million USD, according to the World Bank last year. So IOM still did a study last year in collaboration with the government of Rwanda. And because they trying to contribute to this field, because one of the challenges was to get to know the Rwandans who are out of the country, the diaspora. So they did a study on 4 European countries, Belgium, Germany, Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. So the findings indicated that 47,957 Rwandans live within these 4 European countries, which compose 13.7% of the global Rwandan migration stock that are out of these countries. So again, the same finding indicated that 77% of Rwandan diaspora send the remittances regularly. And they say 48% of these migrants send between 100 and 500 euros per month. So, but the challenge you see is that majority of these transfers are still used as sent to families, and they are used for consumption. You can see that 21% is the one being used for investment. I'll come back to that. So coming back to the Rwanda household survey data, Dominic touched on, and the same data I used for this paper, is that there were 624 households that received remittances. This is from the sample of 14,000 respondents. And majority of these respondents of the study received internal remittances. Remember, here we are talking of cash and in-kind transfers. So we ask these questions to try to answer some of these objectives of this study, whether remittances really affect poverty or contribute to poverty reduction, and which channels do these transfers affect poverty and other development outcomes. But also, we also was interested to see how remittance development effect plays out along the different socioeconomic categories, the quantile groups, the 5 quantile groups. So I think, if you allow me, because I used the same data, for the interest of time, I will not dwell much of my time in the methodology. So use the same data, the same methodology, like what Dominic used. But however, I could mention something maybe Dominic didn't mention, is that I did use the ordinary least square as the baseline model to examine how remittances professionally affect the poverty and the spending of recipients among the different development outcomes like health, education, savings, and investments. So, and also how these remittances affect consumption expenditure by adult equivalent as a proxy for the measure of poverty. And we use this because of its reliability, not risk to the as income. So, but OERS has some critiques that relates to selection bias and endogeneity. That's why we get into the PSM, propensity score matching techniques, to be able to assess how establish the counterfactual, but also use the different matching methods to examine the effect of these transfers to poverty. So I used the same sample. I told you there are 14,419 same study. So if you look at the distribution, here I use the kernel density distribution of consumption expenditure to the treatment group, means that to the household that received remittances against the household that didn't receive remittances, but do share the same characteristics. So you can see that the distribution of the treatment group, which is the household that received remittances, is normally distributed than the household that didn't receive remittances. The same applies to education. So we can say that the remittance recipient households have high propensity to consume or spend on consumption and education than non-recipient households. So if I could go to the model, then also I'll try to be brief and be quick. You will find that I use different types of remittances: internal remittances, international remittances, and both, because you find in the data set, you find also other households who received internal remittances, that is local remittances, and also international remittances. But my interest was much on international remittances. You can see that household that received international remittances, one increase in the international remittance corresponds to 0.463% increase on consumption per adult equivalent, which is poverty. The same 1% increase in the internal and the international remittances corresponds also statistically to 0.63% point increase on consumption expenditure. The same applies when you subject it to cash transfers only. On the second model, you can see. You find that you find a significant effect, which is around 0.3% percentage point increase. These models, or just I wasn't interested to address the other question of how the effect of remittances plays along the different socioeconomic status of recipients, along these development outcomes like education, health, land, business, and savings. And to get to that, I was able to interact remittances with the measure of socioeconomic status, which is quantiles, the 5 quantiles. And you can see that along the results, you find they are statistically significant and negative, meaning that the increase, the effect of remittances reduces as you go up to the different upper income quantile or upper socioeconomic status, which can be indicated by this average marginal effect figures. On the first slide, you see it is the predictive marginal effect of education outcomes subjected to remittances. You can see it is reducing as you move to the upper income categories. So implying that the marginal increase in remittance inflows inversely increases the spending on development outcomes, that is consumption, health, education, savings, and others, with the households that are in lower income distribution than recipients who are in the upper income distribution. Maybe if I could take you back to the empirical findings and theories, that the previous empirical finding argued that remittances don't have effect because they are received and spent by those who are in the upper income quantiles because they are able to finance migration. But these findings and recent findings are continuously showing that the marginal effect, any increase in remittance inflows to those who are in the poor, mostly poor categories, has the significant effect than those who are in the upper income distribution. Then I was also interested to, if you consider the findings of the propensity score matching, I was trying to here in what this model shows is the probability of receiving remittances by the households along different socioeconomic characteristics or covariance as the determinants of remittances. You find that the level of education, socioeconomic categories, household size, gender are all determine the receiving of remittances. But maybe something I could mention here looking at these variables. Educational level determines the receiving of remittances. The reason being is that those who are able to educate and finance education and finance migration also receive remittances than those who are in the primary lower of education or the poor. And that's where the issue comes in. That in terms of values, you find the significant effect in receiving, but the effect on poverty and also on these development outcomes plays out along those who are in the lower income distribution. So these models also wanted to look at the effect using the matching estimators, the nearest neighbor matching estimator and the Canada matching estimator along these development outcomes, consumption, land, and durable assets business. You can see that looking at the consumption, which is our proxy for poverty, the effect of the average effect on treated, meaning the recipient of remittances, is 54.7% using the nearest matching method. Then when you go to the Canada matching method, you find the same findings. This proves, I think, the robustness of our findings. And then it plays out to other development outcome. But you can see on land and the durable assets, it is different because of the nature and the recipients of remittances. Most durable assets, what the argument is that remittances are used to just consume these durable assets which don't have effect. But the land, as maybe for some who have read my paper, is that this can be interpreted with conscience because this goes with the market of the land in the country. But if you go to these other development outcomes like business savings, you find the effect. So I have already explained these are findings. So what we find from overall in the paper is that the findings suggest that pro-development impact of remittances is stronger among poor recipient households than in non-poor recipient households in Rwanda, implying that remittances don't only increase spending, but help to provide avenues through which the poor are able to graduate, but also bridge inequality, as you have seen in the previous figures I have indicated. In the overall, that findings argue that remittance-driven development outcomes do not just emerge. Instead, they are attracted and influenced by the opportunities. You have seen in the early years of Rwanda, before genocide and just after genocide, the flow of remittances was almost low, but you have seen the exponential growth, even the effects growing. So that's where I draw my conclusion using this analogy. Maybe that will stimulate also our discussion is that a seed planted in dry or barren soil does not have the same possibility of germination as a seed planted in fertile soil, implying that remittances are seeds for development. If their inflows and use are mediated by good institution and policy environment, which is the fertile soil I'm talking about, their effect will be significantly increased. So let me conclude with this policy action, since we are discussing a number of policy actions. So one is what you keep getting, maybe there are our partners that are following, is that diaspora engagement and sharing of credible information about opportunities back is important to attract remittances, but also how these remittances are channeled into investment opportunities that can stimulate development outcomes. Let me use this antidote from the Rwandan female professional in the US, sorry, in the UK, in the study that was done by IOM. She said that investing in Rwanda is a great idea, but we all got an uncle somewhere with some crazy get-rich-quick scheme. How can we know what is the best to invest in? Implying that diaspora are out there desperate for credible information about opportunities where to invest and use their resources to stimulate the local economy. I think that's a point for policy discussion mostly, and even scholar discussion. Another point is the issue of data governance. If you continuously work in this area, you find that the question is about the inflows, but also how do we capture data, how do we analyze data, and how do we use data to inform policies, but also data across different remittance channels. Now we have got digitalization that is emerging in Africa. Now the question is, how do we able to track this data for remittances to be able to understand where the money is going? Another thing is that money transfer operators, including financial institutions, need to recognize diaspora as potential clients with clear characteristics and specific needs. The needs of diaspora are different from the needs of the local citizens. So hence they need a certain treatment, implying that financial institutions need to create special products such as credit lines targeting diaspora SMEs and other investments. Thank you very much. Yeah, maybe my paper, I didn't talk a lot, but my paper is online. It can be found also on the CDP website as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward, for the good presentation. This was, again, a very interesting paper. I think the agenda was shared with you, as I mentioned in the beginning. So after these presentations, we are going to invite discussants. We have the first and second discussant. And then later on, we'll invite contributors, the first and second contributors. Let me recognize Dr. Silas Udahemka from the World Bank, who will be the discussant of the first paper presented by Dominic. And let me also recognize Dr. Otieno from the International Institute of Social Studies of Erasmus University in The Hague, who will be also discussing the second paper on remittances. The first contributor, let me recognize Professor Jonathan from Suffolk University, Boston, USA. And our second contributor will be Mr. Wilson Kamali, the Director of Statistics from the National Bank of Rwanda. After the discussions and the contributions from the contributors and discussants respectively, we will have an open discussion where all participants will have an opportunity to ask questions or to make comments, and then I'll hand over to the Executive Director to give concluding remarks. So let me invite the first discussant, Dr. Silas, to give his views on the first paper, and you have 15 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, moderator, and thank you very much, Dr. Edward and Dominic, for a good presentation. So let me first, introduce myself. I'm Silas Udahemuka. I'm the Human Development Specialist working with the World Bank. So for over last 15 years plus, I've been engaged in development work, mostly, as a practitioner, and little on the academic side, but of course I'm always interested in academics, paper, as as you were here discussing. Academics always informs the policy discussions and the implementation. So first of all, let me also say that the views I'm going to share here do not necessarily reflect the views of my institution, the World Bank. These are going to be my personal views as well. So on the paper, first of all, let me thank the researchers on the first paper, which covers the effect of direct support. The team really did a great job, and I think this is adding to the existing body of knowledge, particularly for cash transfers or social protection in general. The existing evidence base is by far dominated by the evidence from other countries. So basically in our dialogue, we have mostly been informed by the evidence generated for other countries. Now I think having this evidence base being generated specifically for Rwanda, it's very important. It's important for a number of reasons. One, in any dialogue you will have, right, being policymakers, being implementers at the grassroots level, they will always tell you, what, you guys, you're providing cash transfers, you are basically going to influence dependence, people are going to be just looking forward to receiving. You are giving hands out. Why can't we rather focus on public works, that is having someone have to work to gain something, rather than providing cash transfers or direct support. So basically we are using international evidence and some of the local evidence that were generated previously. So we engage into that dialogue. It's not about creating independence, it's not handouts, it's not all that. But now having a paper like this now generating evidence specifically for Rwanda, it's good. Now specifically on this paper, I think the finding that the direct support increased the consumption level of beneficiaries and has reduced the proportion of people under poverty line, are basically in line with earlier evidence that were generated, including the evidence that was generated by the National Institute of Statistics of Rwanda. I'm talking about the analytical work done around EICV5, where the NISR recognized the direct support as one of the good performing component of the VUP in terms of raising household welfare. So that is in line with what we are finding in this paper. So the magnitude of the impact might be different basically because of probably methodological issues. But I think the main message is that yes, direct support is good for poverty reduction, is good for raising the welfare of the household members. So it is also important, as the paper did, to recognize that the cash transfer affects household behaviors with trickle effect on the outcome of the interventions. So basically, I want here to speak about a couple of elements that are important for the cash transfer to have impact, particularly the direct support, some of which the paper discussed, others not to great details. But I will start with the coverage. Coverage is very important for a program like a cash transfer or direct support have impact on the aggregate poverty level. For the under EICV5, I know the data used is EICV4, but EICV5, the NSR indicated that the coverage for the direct support was basically 1.3% of Rwandan population. So that, of course, as per 2016-17, represented basically, the 100% of all eligible households for the direct support. But of course, with that, low coverage, aggregate poverty level is going, of course, to be minimum. That's one. There is also size of the transfer. We often refer to it as, adequacy of the transfer. So I think if you look at different components of the VUP, the direct support is the most generous component, social protection component. So the paper, you spoke about, around 39% of the poverty line, which is, is really generous, and the impact, expected, from that. size of transfer should be sizable as well. Number 3, there is timeliness of the transfer is very important. If households don't have knowledge as to when they will receive the next transfers, these will affect their behaviors. Someone, let's say thinking about saving, might end up consuming whatever he gets or she gets. But with the timeliness of the transfers, at least there is good prediction for the household, and there is better planning for the households that also have effect on the outcome of the transfers. There is, of course, a good element, a good point that the paper discussed, which is the household behavior. Household behavior, as effect of receiving cash is very important consideration, because it will affect labor supply. It may affect whether prioritizing savings or investment and all that. So, and that while still on either savings or investment, I want to make a point here that as we analyze the effect of cash transfer or direct support, we need to be mindful of discussing the short-term and also mid-term and long-term effect. The paper probably did not dwell into that distinction between short-term, long-term effect, but we may find modest outcomes in terms of poverty reduction in the short term, but based on whether individuals or households have opted either for saving or investment, the long-term effect could be much bigger. So we need to be aware of that, and probably that is an element that probably for future analytical work to see to follow the same households and see how the impact in the long run looks like, as opposed to the effect in the short run. Now, another element I want to speak about, and which also have effect on the direct support, is targeting accuracy. As the VUP for Rwanda is basically relying on the Ubudehe or community-based targeting, but the efficiency of this targeting method is really questionable. We did some analytical work at the bank, and when we looked at the poverty share among households in Ude category 1, which are basically theoretically eligible to receive benefits under VUP program and especially DS, we found that only 46% of households in Ude category 1 are actually poor. So what does this mean? It means that there has been significant inclusion and exclusion errors in the targeting process based on this community-based Ubudehe program, Ubudehe process. So that in itself would have implication on the outcome or the impact of the transfers. So if you transfer some of the proceeds to non-poor households, sorry, here this I have the light which goes off if there's no movement, so sorry for that. So if you transfer money to significant portion of the money to non-deserving households, you understand what you will get in terms of outcomes. So now the paper did I think I like the comparing cash transfer, DS and remittances. That is very important and interesting discussion. So it was interesting to see that, you know, comparing DS and remittances, you know, are performing much better than, you know, the unconditional cash transfers. There's an element I want to bring probably, you know, which the paper did not, you know, discuss. If you think about it, the remittances, so basically mostly, you know, engages, you know, individuals or households, you know, on one-to-one basis. So there is basically, you know, someone, you know, sending remittances, there is someone receiving. So that relationship one-to-one is very important, you know, to influencing, you know, the outcomes of remittances. Because if you think about it, it's more or less a sort of, you know, there's an element of, you know, if I may call it, you know, co-responsibilities on the side of the receivers. Because if you are the sender, sometimes, you know, you give some, you know, co-responsibilities to be met by the receiver, because you want, you know, to support, you know, someone. You are in turn more or less, you know, the same venture. That's why you are sending, you know, that money. That is element for remittances probably that was not discussed, you know, in any of the paper, that we need, you know, to also consider as well. So there is some sort of, you know, co-responsibilities between, you know, co-responsibilities on the side of the receivers, which makes, you know, somehow the remittances, you know, work, you know, much better than, you know, the cash transfers. And also, you know, these co-responsibilities or conditionalities does not make, you know, the management of the remittances, you know, cumbersome as it is in terms of, you know, conditional cash transfers. So it's, you know, one individual or one, you know, group of individual dealing with, you know, other group of individuals in terms of remittances. So now another element that probably, you know, we need to be thinking about, it's, you know, usually people, when we talk about, you know, social protection, especially, you know, direct support, people may tend to think about, you know, graduation as well, you know, graduating or, you know, moving, you know, out of poverty. That, I think, you know, has a lot and ignores a lot as well. If you look at, you know, the case of Rwanda, recipient of direct support, right, those people mostly, you know, at all age, people without labor capacities, people are in the poorest, you know, categories without labor capacity and outside, you know, the working age. These people are not, you know, supposed, you know, basically, you know, to graduate. So most of them, you know, they will be living, you know, on social support, you know, forever, I would say. So that's something that we need, you know, to be aware of, and also consider, as, you know, we discuss, you know, the outcomes, you know, of direct support. And also this point is reflective on the new UDA categories that will are about, you know, to be out, where there is, you know, a special categories, which is a special category, I mean category E, which, you know, will be only for those people who will be living on the cash transfers, you know, for the entire of their life. So I'm almost, you know, through with my 15 minutes. Okay, let me take 1 minute, you know, and speak, you know, some of the probably, you know, quick feedback on this paper as well. I see the paper is using, you know, EICV4 data, which is, you know, 6-7 years old data. I would want, you know, to see probably, you know, another analytical work, you know, using probably EICV5. I know EICV6 didn't, you know, get to collect all the data, but I think, you know, it will be important. That's one. Second, I think, you know, there's some, you know, factual information, you know, within the paper, within the paper that probably could have been useful if, you know, cross-checked with probably people running, you know, the program. For example, I don't think that for the over a period of 10 years, a decade period, only, you know, 50 million 50 USD million were invested in VUP program. That's far below, the actual amount that was spent on the program. So I think that, something that could have cross-checked with the implementers. Second, on the eligibility criteria for direct support, I know for direct support, eligibility criteria was, for UBUDE category 1 and 2 up to 2012, when there were 6 categories. But from 2012 upward, the eligibility criteria for direct support turned to be meant for UBUDE category 1 only, plus other characteristics like without labor capacity or old age and all that. So I think the data you are using, combining both the period when the eligibility criteria was UBUDE 1 and 2, and for when the eligibility criteria was exclusively for UBUDE category 1. Those are the kind of few points that probably next round of analytical work like this, it will be important to cross-check some of the data with the actual implementers of the program. But overall, hats off to you guys. You did a great job, and it's gonna help the dialogue and reinforce the points that practitioners have been making on the role and usefulness of these programs. I stop here. I've exhausted my minutes. Over to you, Edward, Matthias, and Dominic.
Thank you, Dr. Silas, for the very insightful comments. I think the researchers have picked your ideas, and I think they can follow up with you if they need more clarifications. So let me invite the second discussant, Dr. Otieno.
Thanks so much, colleagues in Kigali and everywhere. Those are very interesting presentations, and I think comments that have just been made are very much appropriate. I read both papers, even though I will comment on the first one, but on the second one. But when I now look back to what's all this about cash transfers, it seems we are having two distinctions here of direct cash transfers and remittances, but it depends on how we define these two elements. I'm beginning to think, what's really about them? Why are they an issue? And as we've known, probably those who have studied things in other systems, and in many African countries, this is an increasing focus, or there's an increasing focus on what's happening with those who are left behind. And I think whatever name we want to call them, they're about safety nets or well-being of people who are in a precarious conditions, for example. And I think that should be our starting point. Why these transfers and what's behind them? And I think the idea that some people are left behind or should not be left behind, especially when they're vulnerable, is very central to this discussion. And that's why when I hear comments about the role of government, policy, and politics in all this, it's about the well-being of people. It is a social contract question, which then takes a more practical dimension when you say, what do you do about people that have been left out in the economy or whose conditions are not well? That is one, and it follows on the discussions about whether the terms of giving these transfers, for example, whether it's conditional, there are conditions about them, whether people are responsible enough, and what does that do in terms of economy? So if I use that as a starting point, then I was asking in relation to international remittances, why? When I look at it, it borders or it fits within the broader discussion about migration and development, or the development nexus when we talk about migration, because remittances sent by diasporas as a result or a consequence of their movement somewhere else. So for me, the critical aspects for attention, both in research and policy, include a few elements. And it boils down to some of the things that have been raised by the previous speaker also. One is the sources of these funds or sources of the resource. There's, in terms of remittances from the diasporas, they're both individual and collective. And those two categories need to be understood very well, because unless we understand them, we might not be able to cover what remittances are all about in a comprehensive way. The second thing is about the conditions under which remittances are made, that is generated or sent. And the third point is the nature of remittances. And the fourth one is the impact of remittances, which the two papers address, and more so the one by Dr. Edward. As we've known, there are different types of remittances. We always have these three categories, whether financial, material, or social. But at some point, I think we also need to reflect on, is there really a clear distinction? Yes, there might be some obvious distinction when you talk about money, literally sent, but that money could be sent to do things, or some materials could be sent and then they generate money. Or there could be some social issues in terms of idea, technology, information that actually generates money. These things are always not, I mean, they're discussed as if they're very distinct, but there's a connection to them. And I think we need to have some kind of a multidimensional approach to look at them. So when I read Dr. Edward's paper, I found it quite interesting. And also in the first paper, the issue of consumption comes in very strongly. And I get to wonder, as someone who is a subject of this topic, and also someone who researches it, and someone with the lived experience of what is being discussed today, why this obsession with consumption? What is it about consumption? Why is it an issue? I saw that the figures are quite interesting, that a lot has been spent on so-called consumption and little on development outcomes, or what has been described here as probably investment. In Edward's estimates, 21% on investment and 87% in consumption. The presentation is quite clear, and it picks up the most fundamental things for us to understand. But my comment would be to actually ask more questions about what this paper generates or raises, to rethink or re-question some of these notions we already have about whether it is investment or consumption. One, if we look at the context like where we are now in the diaspora, so-called, no one talks about consumption. We talk about economy doing well. We talk about actually consumer confidence. That's what is talked about whenever dynamics emerge which impact on economy. The markets are disrupted on the basis of different global dynamics which are felt locally. But the consumer confidence is always a very important factor being considered. I'm not from economics background, but that's my layman's take. And I say there must be something very important about consumption. We don't consume what goes into the sea. We consume products. But actually, the very essence, the meaning of consumption is just use of a resource. And this resource can be as many as possible. If we take what we always assume to be what families or recipients consume, all those elements fit within the economic description of or what we would consider as part of economic activity on the ground, some directly, others indirectly. For example, money goes to food, health, water, education of all levels, or housing, small, medium enterprises, when we talk about remittances. But then that spending or that resource is used, and that use, the act of spending it in those elements spills over into the economy in different ways, including people who are doing construction, or even people who are giving help in terms of care for elderly. So my question is, on the basis of these findings, can we find a way to rethink based on Edward's findings, to rethink how we look at these two elements, the remittances that diaspora send, but also cash transfers, by trying to find what actually is the value here, and how can we upscale that value, or how can we upscale initiatives that increases that value? And the total value should be well-being of people, that some people are not left behind. For example, when I look at the remittance and development thesis, the focus is on investment, and there we see direct investment. And I think Edward rightly points to the physical aspects, the human capital, savings, and business. Very good, and many diasporas do that in private capacity, together with banks, or through cooperatives, or through associations, and they try to put up something together. Even trying to put up a house, for example. They buy materials, they employ people. There are people selling food to those who are building. So that little amount that is sent has an economic impact to some extent. The social aspect to it has also an economic element, and that is service provision and well-being of people through projects that people initiate from the remittances or through the remittances, actually give the foundations for equal opportunities or a starting point to people. And I think if you have an opportunity or a starting point, that's already one brick layer for dealing with poverty, because you've increased your capacity to deal with a situation or mitigate a condition. And on the basis of this discussion or development thesis, we look at types of remittances and their potentials. And that's when I come back to this discussion about the individual remittances, which are very instant, regular. Some could also be long-term. And there I also, about the discussion also with some colleagues, and I think Edward also had a discussion with you about this. When we want to tap into that type of remittance, which is very individual, which is already superseding ODA at the moment, the question is, which type of remittances actually can make a big difference? The instant one, the regular one, the long term, especially when, depending on how people are formed in the diaspora, how long they've been there, their status there, their participation in the labor market and in other forms of economic activity, which enables them to generate enough capital to be able to send back home. Hence, unless people are working, but if they're working, there could be different ages of working or stages of work or participation in the labor market. And that is where we can start to look at who is remitting at what stage in their period of stay in the diaspora. There could be people working in different sectors, people who are just newly employed. There are also people going into retirement. And if you look at that group, which I call the long-term group, or the ones working in the cooperatives, these ones are likely to remit quite a large amount from their savings or from their social benefits under the transferability of benefits if the country has arranged that. Because that's a huge amount of money someone can invest in serious economic activity than the small little ones that people do send, if the goal is to help them upscale whatever they're doing for economic development. The same applies to collective remittances, which are done through associations or through individuals working together. I think when you look at the small amounts put together, you're likely to receive much more impact, either through a cooperative or investing in real estate and other kind of opportunities. So in my view, in Edward's paper, we could still try to find out, be more specific, and look at what type of remittances now are we talking about, and what are their potentials, and then how can we upscale that? Because your paper rightly points out that there's something happening with the consumption, there's something happening with in terms of development outcomes, but not that as expected probably in the literature. But when you look at realities on the ground, the so-called consumption actually is contributing to economy. In a Western society, there's no problem with consumption. Well, we only talk about consumption as an issue when we look at the Global South. We talk about remittances from the North to the Global South, but never talk about remittances from the Global South to the North. We never talk about that. So focus is much more on this little bit that diaspora tries to send back home. But the narrative, the dominant narrative around that actually shapes the kind of analysis we give and the likely uptake of what we discuss in terms of policy. So I know there are a lot of issues which we could cover here, but in terms of challenges to remittances, this is an area which this study, for example, could try to highlight much more. And it relates to the source of the resource. That is, where does the remittance come from? Under what condition it is brought? And how can we make that possible so that we leverage on its potential? When I look at diaspora remittances, or what I would call what politics and policy need to understand or pay attention to which I think, Edward, you touched on it in your last slides, it's again back to the history or the mystery of migration of the people we expect to send the money. The mixture of drivers of migration plays a very big role here. And their status and position in the host society is very critical. If we talk about individual remittances or collective remittances, then we have issues like fragmentation or community within groups or between groups, especially in the case of Rwanda in the post-conflict or and post-conflict period. What does it mean? The reason why I ask this question is connections with the remittances is also shaped by aspirations and motivations. That is the connections that people have or the linkages and affinities they have with the so-called place where they came from. And these connections are sometimes very problematic, depends on the relationship they have with the government or with different people or other people. For example, the case of Rwanda, where people lost families or whole families. It can be very traumatic, and you ask someone, why would you want to send back money there? So I've been engaged a little bit with the Rwandan diaspora, but whenever I think about this condition, what would make a Rwandese to send money back home, money that makes a difference to that person or to the community or to the nation as a whole? And that's when I asked this question about aspirations and motivations, which you can find in the literature. But this has to do also with things like if people feel they're affiliated to Rwanda in a specific way, they might have some aspirations tied to that. For example, if they're tired with being here or they've reached the age of pension. But the question is, what do you return to? If you read the works of Alejandro Portes, he looks at why people always want to do something back home, besides helping. Others want to start businesses because they want to benefit from those businesses. But we also have reverse remittances sent by people from their investments back in the country of origin to where they're living now. If you read the works of Valentina Mazzucato talking about reverse remittances, people send back here when conditions are not good. So these dynamics are very important. And more so, if people want to return, it's also not only about what to return to, but also what to return with. And that also informs the kind of remittances people want to give. And I think that is an aspect that could be discussed at some point in the work that is now, or the issues that around the issues that are being raised by the paper by Dr. Edward. But in conclusion, I want to make it short. The inequality thesis, I hear it, and I've worked on it for quite some time in West Africa, but also part of East Africa. But the question is, we always ask, who is capable of migrating? That is always the question. And people know that to a large extent, it is people with means that are able to move. That is to buy a ticket but still we also have a large segment of migrants that move by borrowing money. People are in debt, especially not those who are not endowed with a lot of money. They borrow money and they hope to pay once they reach the other side. And that's why most migrants are in debt or are put in very precarious conditions because they're trying to pay back the debt that enabled them to travel. And we can look at which category you're talking about. Those who bought the tickets, who are they? Those who came through other means, who are they? And under what condition they are able to generate remittances? The other question is, once people generate or send remittances back home, it's on the basis of individual choices linked to aspirations and motivations and connections they have there. But the question is, we have known that sometimes this question of group or regional representation in the diaspora, depending on which group left in large numbers. It could be from a region or from a particular village. And for sure, that generates questions about inequality in terms of development outcomes through remittances. But we have seen also when diasporas return as individuals, where are they returning? Are they going back to the village or are they going back to cities? Or if they're investing, where are they investing? If they're returning just for retirement, where are they going? Are they returning back to family and so on? And that also depends, in the case of Rwanda, if someone still had a family left after the tragedy. And the other key question is the role of government and policy linked to incentives. What incentives are there that are linked or tied to diaspora initiatives that can help to leverage on their development potential when the government gives more possibilities for investment or incentives that enable people to spread out the kind of money or the kind of investment they're having. So I try to put some caveats on this idea of inequality thesis by saying remittances generally plow into the national economy. And I think, Edward, you covered it also partly in your presentation. But this needs to be explained quite well. We need to make that very clear. How then does that make a difference? Because once it gets into the economy, the question is, how does it reach a very ordinary person or someone is left behind? So maybe you can say through direct cash transfers, but that's something that is worth looking into. The other question is remittances. Collective remittances have a broader impact. And my work on this for quite some time points to this. When I look at different categories of collective remittances through diaspora organizations that are
Dr. Anthony, sorry for interrupting.
It's my last spot.
All right.
So yes, so these different categories are likely to spread or diversify their remittances in very interesting way. But even if you look at individual remittances, investments, whether real estate or whichever type of investment, they will often transcend one location or a group of people. And two, returnees might also opt to choose for both rural and urban areas. Or diasporas who have projects, these projects are not only meant for a specific location, especially if they target the broader population. So if we look at those features of diaspora involvement at that level, the question is, whom are we talking about, and how can the nature of their remittances be upscaled or leveraged in a way that links up with the national policy agenda that addresses the original question, the welfare or the safety net and welfare of people, that people are not left behind. If we talk about social protection or we talk about safety net in general, and as a part of a policy to look at the role of migration and development, if we take that angle to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anton, for the comments. This has been, again, very insightful, and I hope Edward heard you very well. I'm quite sure you two are familiar with each other, so you can make up the follow-up and maybe discuss more about the issues you have raised. Let me now go to the contributors, and the first one is Professor Jonathan. Professor Jonathan, you can give your contribution, preferably in 10 minutes. If you do that, that would be great for us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Something's wrong?
It's better now.
Yes, yes.
That's
No. Okay, Professor Jonathan has some technical issues. Apologies for that. We'll come back to him. Let's go to our second contributor, Mr. Wilson Kamari from Vienna. Wilson, if you can hear me, you can take the floor and give your contribution. Wilson, are you there?
Hello?
Yes, Wilson.
Yes, can you hear me well?
Yes, yes. Now it is better. You can give your comments. In 10 minutes, if you do that in 10 minutes, preferably that would be better for us. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, sorry. Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, but for the bit of the connectivity, allow me turn off my video. It seems my gadgets are not working well.
It's okay. You can speak.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to participate on these important discussions. Thank you, the researchers, for the insightful and very informative outcome of your work. My discussion point, I will not dwell much on the micro level, the impact and the importance of remittances on the on supporting consumer at household level, but looking at more at macro level, remittances is such important, particularly for the Rwandan perspective. When we see the remittances over the years, if you see this, it's part in terms of countries' GDP and financing the trade balance is such substantial, and remittances have been also key contributor in Rwanda, particularly in in smoothening foreign exchange and contributing to stabilize the domestic currency, and also sustain debt usually repayable in foreign currency. So at macro level, remittances are also very important, particularly talking from the central bank point of view, why we so much interested in remittances data, and at macro level, how does it impact? So if you look at the central bank, probably the experience, how we do, we, of course, we based more on administrative data. Of course, we know household survey also does play this key information and data, but normally the source of remittances information that we use on a regular basis, we have cash transfers through money transfer operators and telecom companies now, bridging the sort of, bringing in the competition in terms of transfer channels. Then we also look at personal cash transfers, and one of the survey we did in 2018, it was indicating that about 43% of Forex Bureau purchases are from public, and normally these are remittances. So this shows the contribution of remittances in terms of smoothening the foreign exchange or the foreign currency demand on the market. Yeah, so as I mentioned, we have seen, particularly in Rwanda, the digitization platforms, particularly through the telecom company, are playing a big role in terms of facilitating the movement of remittances. Currently, we see, for instance, 41% of the total remittances inflow are channeled through mobile money. So you will know traditionally channels used, you know, we know Western Union, MoneyGram, but telecom are coming in also to make this very competitive and more easier for even the people in the village to be able to receive their transfer, the remittances transfer, without moving to the banking service or MTO services. So here it's just to emphasize that the role of digitization
Wilson, I have lost you. Wilson, I think we have some technical glitches from Wilson's side. Probably if Professor Jonathan is ready, he can give his contribution. Maybe later on we can come back to Wilson to give him the opportunity to finalize.
Okay, can you hear me, Matthias? Now I think this is working. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Now I would like to share a file here. I just have a few comments to make. I'll go through them quickly. On the remittance paper, I think it would be interesting to explore further the so-called flypaper effect. The idea here is that we're finding that the unconditional cash transfers are spent in a different way from remittances. And the question is why? So if I get an extra $100 in remittances, I spend it differently. Is this because of the stability of the flow? Is it because remittances have a social relationship with the sender? Is it because of the size of the transfers? We really don't have good data on this, and it's something that we need to know more about. I also note that the results for Rwanda on remittances are very similar to those found elsewhere. I was involved in some work on Vietnam a few years ago. Local remittances, that's to say within Vietnam, were equalizing. But international remittances were disequalizing. Now, is this a bad thing? Not necessarily, but it's something we do observe. But I do think that there's an under-researched area, which is the knock-on effects of remittance spending. So if I receive $100, how do I use it? If I spend a lot of it locally, I'm going to help create income, at least in an economy that's not completely at full employment. And if I hire local people to clean my house, to build an extension, to help me to produce clothes, the remittances may actually have a more equalizing effect, even if they come from abroad, once the multiplier effects have been taken into account. And I think this would be an interesting avenue to explore. I've just 5 quick points on unconditional cash transfers. The first one is, this is the only way to get to the poorest of the poor. You can't give money conditionally to people who are very old or handicapped. And this is a growing issue because Africa, as well as the rest of the world, is getting older. And the proportion of the population that is not very capable of looking after themselves is growing. So this is an increasing issue. Now, the third, though, is that how do we identify the people who need our help? We cannot do household survey data of surveys of everybody. It's far too expensive. So we need shortcuts to figure out who should get these transfers. So, for example, you have to be in Ubudehi Category 1 and no able-bodied members of the household. But as has been pointed out, these rules are only rules of thumb. If you look at the number of people listed in Ubudehi Category 1, it has grown enormously. Everybody wants to be categorized as poor so they can get the benefits from being categorized as poor. But what that means is these criteria can be manipulated. Even things like, is there somebody able-bodied in the household, is difficult to define. So while Rwanda probably has a fairly good system of identifying the poor compared to some others, could it be improved? And we need measures that indicate who is needy, but that you can't cheat on. And I think this is an understudied problem. A number of years ago, Martin Revalian at the World Bank was looking for shortcut ways to measure who is poor. And he looked at data from Jamaica, and he said, could we measure poverty by whether you have blankets, whether your house is made of mud, and so on and so forth. And his conclusion was quite pessimistic. He reckoned that there is no quick and easy way to identify the poor. But that's a terrible conclusion, because in the real world, if we are going to provide transfers to the poor, we have to have shortcuts. There is no way around it. And so I think we need to do much more experimenting about how we identify the poor in practice. And then we can try to see, using our more elaborate household survey data, whether that targeting is in fact efficient. The next thing, and this is a point that Dominique made, the benefits of transfers may not show up in lower measured poverty. Because if you decide that now that you've got a bit of money, you'll buy your food instead of growing it, that reveals that growing your own food was a terrible burden and something that you really want to avoid. So I think we need to try to gather information about the disutility, about the hardships that people face in their working lives, and try to find out to what extent we are making their lives easier when we provide them with cash. One final point, the more we have unconditional cash transfers, the more people hope to rely on these, especially in their old age. And that will mean that the need to have lots of children will be diminished. And we've certainly seen this effect elsewhere in the world. And this is an important long-term effect, because much of Africa still has a demographic challenge. Rwanda is the most densely populated country in continental Africa, and yet its population is projected to double by roughly mid-century. And the ability of the country to feed and support that number of people is very much in question unless it can quite quickly change the structure of its economy. And if there's a little bit less demographic pressure, so much the better. That will be helpful. So with those quick comments, let me pass the baton to the next person. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jonathan, for the very, very insightful comments, and for being very brief and spot on. We lost Wilson while he was still making his comments. We can give him the opportunity to finalize his contribution. Wilson, if you can hear me, please.
Yes, please. Thank you, and very sorry about that. I wanted to share. I just have one slide that I wanted to share with you. Let me see. Are you able to see it?
Not yet.
Are you able to, not yet. See?
Okay, now I think it is coming. Yeah. But you have actually shared the platform. you are sharing Microsoft Teams, our screen that we are working on.
Okay.
Can you maximize? Yeah, okay, now it is there. Sorry, can you maximize it? I think you have minimized it. Can you maximize it and then share?
So are you able to see it?
Not yet. Yes, now it's okay, fine. But you can put it in presentation mode. Yes, great. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. So what I wanted, I just wanted to really to show the relevance of remittances at macro level. So as we know, Rwanda, like other emerging economies, run a current account deficit. So if we see over the years how the impact of remittances in terms of financing the current account deficit in Rwanda is it's been really substantial. So if here is trying to show, you know, the current account deficit. If we see the remittances in terms of balance of payment under the secondary income, which is the green bar. And this green bar, the secondary income, this is mainly made up of government grants and diaspora remittances. And this other chart, we see the remittances have been growing faster. And if we see as the remittances share on the total government grants, it's around 88.5%. So this is really substantial amount. And if you compare the remittances to the total export receipts, it's now at 36%. So this is really to show the impact of remittances at a more macro level. So most of the discussions, the research is looking at micro, the impact on households, consumers, individuals, but this remittance is also, it's a potential source to finance the current account deficit. Sometime in 2018, we tried to do a conduct to understand these remittances. What are they coming in to do for what purpose? So these were sort of preliminary findings at that time. However, one of the challenges that we face at the central bank is the data. So if you go to the banks or the MTOs or forex bureaus, this is not the information that they normally capture. You know, for us to go deep and understand these remittances, are they coming to support consumptions? Are they coming in to support investment? So some of the findings from the interviewed people, the remittances coming in are coming in for both, to smoothen consumption at the same time for investment. So, as I said, one of the big challenge is having comprehensive and complete data. So, so this is what I wanted to emphasize or to add to what has been presented in the research findings. So, just to conclude, I think it is one of some of what has been highlighted and in other literature that you see around, the issues on cost as a barrier to allow remittances flowing into Africa, and then what relationship the government with the diaspora community, you know, something that is being talked in different literature. So without taking much more time, that's what I wanted to highlight. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Wilson, for giving us the macro view regarding the impact of remittances. And I think it is in agreement with the micro-level findings that remittances are indeed important for welfare enhancements, even at the macro level. And we have seen the findings from both papers that development finance is a critical issue, especially in Africa, particularly in Rwanda, and that remittances can contribute towards the development agenda of countries. We have also seen from the first paper, which uses the triangulation of methods to unpack the impact, the micro level impact of those intervention programs that the government makes on the welfare of people. And I think the findings are quite illuminating. The comments given are very good, and they are all in agreement that these interventions, these programs are indeed very, very important. I think all of us agree that these interventions that Dominique talked about, or the remittances that Edward talked about, are quite important. If you are not able to see the impact of these, it is either because we don't have information, as highlighted by Wilson, or because of measurement problems that I think Dominique talked about quite extensively. And Professor Jonathan also came to touched most of these issues. So without wasting much of your time, let me open the floor for discussions. Any participant that wants to give comments or to ask questions can raise his hand or her hand, and then we'll give him or her the floor to give the comment or to ask a question. But before that, let me say that Dr. Anthony Otieno had written a comment, and if I look at it, I think he already touched these issues while giving his contribution. So I'll not read these comments. I can see that he covered most of these issues. So anyone with a comment, question, please, you can raise your hand, and we'll give you the opportunity to give your comment or to ask a question. Thank you. Anyone? It seems there are no comments, no questions. The presenters were very clear, I think. The contributors also very clear. So the open discussion is going to be skipped, and we just go on to the next activity, which is concluding remarks from the Executive Director of CDP. Kasim, if you can hear me, the floor is yours to give your concluding remarks.
Okay, hello. Thank you very much. Thank you, Matthias, for the moderation, and for the presenters for presenting, and also the discussants for making their constructive contributions. I wonder if the respondents, the presenters, would have wanted to react to the comments, or I just deliver the concluding remarks at this point. So assuming that there is no reaction, I take this opportunity once again to thank the two presenters, the discussants, and the contributors. I also thank everyone who has managed to spare the time to to spare the time to attend the entire virtual workshop on cash transfers and remittances. it has been a very good opportunity for us to hear from the different contributors, the expertise of the different presenters, contributors, and discussants. As you might be aware, this is just the starting point in a series of discussions that we shall be making in different topics. I mentioned at the beginning that this is just the beginning, and as some of you might be aware, cash transfers and migration and remittances are just some of the topics that we work on at CDP. We have a range of topics. We have financial sector development, we have gender and women empowerment, we have climate change and environmental services. We have a number of other development topics that we work on, and having started with cash transfers and remittances, it does not mean that it's the limit of our work. That's just to set the discussion series rolling. We shall be coming up with more papers in different topics and present them, discuss them, and keep engagement between academics, policy, and somewhere between the two arms of the evidence process. So we appreciate everyone who has participated, and without taking much time already, we apologize. We are about 30 minutes 30 minutes late. So I will not take much more time, but I will just appreciate all of you who have participated, and please we are also looking forward to your future participation in the other series that we shall be arranging on different topics. Thank you very much. And before I let everyone go, I was advised that to signify our participation, if everyone could turn on back the camera to have a group virtual photo, that will be very appreciated. Otherwise, thank you very much once again, and we hope to have you again in the future to have the same fruitful discussion. Thanks a lot, and thank you very much for the camera, everyone. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.